Lindsay Moses stood at the edge of the master bedroom doorway, gripping the silk fabric of her wedding gown so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The room smelled of fresh roses and sandalwood candles, and somewhere below the estate's grand windows, she could still hear the faint echo of string quartets packing up their instruments and the last of the guests filtering into their waiting cars. The reception was over. The applause, the toasts, the polite photographs, all finished. And now it was just her, and him, and a room full of soft light and unbearable silence. Barone Silvestri stood near the far window, his back half turned to her, jacket removed, hands folded behind him as he looked out at the dark sprawl of his Italian estate's lavender gardens. He had not said a word since they'd entered the room. He had not moved toward her. He had not even glanced at her since she'd stopped in the doorway, and Lindsay could not make herself move. If you've ever stood in a moment where your body simply refuses to obey you, where your heart knows one thing and your legs know another, then you already understand exactly what she felt standing there. She was 29 years old. She had survived things most people never have to survive. And still, this quiet bedroom, this quiet man, had managed to become the most terrifying room she had ever entered. She had not told him about the scars. She had not told anyone. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories we tell on this channel will pull something out of your chest and put it back in a completely different shape. Like the video if you want more. Now let's get back to Lindsay. The scars ran along her left side and lower back. Remnants of 3 years she never spoke about, inflicted by hands that were supposed to protect her. She had learned to dress carefully, to move deliberately, to keep herself layered and covered in a way that looked like personal style rather than survival strategy. Nobody had ever noticed. Nobody had ever asked. And nobody had ever been close enough to find out. Until now. Barone Silvestri was many things. The world called him feared. The newspapers called him powerful. His rivals called him dangerous in tones that dropped to whispers. He was the head of one of the oldest and most quietly influential families in all of Italy. A man who moved through rooms the way storms move through open fields, filling everything, touching nothing, leaving people slightly breathless in his wake. He was 35, dark-eyed, carved from some older, more serious era where men said less and meant everything. He was, by every measurable standard, extraordinary. And he was standing in Lindsay's new bedroom pretending to be intensely interested in a lavender garden he had probably looked at 10,000 times. She exhaled slowly. He heard it. She could tell because his shoulders shifted, just slightly, just barely, the kind of shift that only happens when someone is paying very close attention to something they are pretending not to notice. "You don't have to stand in the doorway," he said quietly. His voice was low and slightly formal, the way it always was, like he had learned English from very serious books and never quite let go of the precision. "This is your room as well." "Our room," she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't, because saying it out loud made it more real and more impossible at the same time. "Yes," he said. "Our room." A pause stretched between them. Lindsay finally stepped inside, and immediately the weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders like something physical. She set her small clutch on the nearest surface, a writing desk near the armoire, and stood there, hands loose at her sides, trying to calculate the geometry of the situation. The bed was enormous. Ivory linens, for carved posts, approximately 1,000 pillows. Barone turned from the window. For a moment they just looked at each other across the candlelit room, two strangers who had signed documents and made vows and danced one careful waltz in front of 400 people, and who now had to figure out what happened next. Lindsay's hands began to tremble. Not visibly. She had learned to keep the trembling internal, to press it down into her bones where no one could see it. But it was there, climbing through her fingers and up through her wrists, and she pressed her palms against the silk of her gown to stop it. Barone watched her. Then he did the last thing she expected. He walked to the bed, calmly and deliberately, picked up approximately half the decorative pillows, and began arranging them down the center of the mattress in a long, careful line, like a wall. Pillow wall. A precise, carefully constructed border down the exact middle of the bed. He smoothed the last pillow into place with the focused attention of a man solving an engineering problem, and then stepped back to assess his work. "There," he said, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just accomplished something important. We will sleep like polite strangers. I snore when emotionally overwhelmed. Lindsay stared at him. He looked at her briefly, then back at his pillow barrier. I feel it is important for you to know that in advance. You're emotionally overwhelmed, she repeated slowly. Yes, he said. Considerably. She did not know what to do with that information. She stood very still, trying to decide if this man was the strangest person she had ever met, or the safest, or somehow both at once. Barone returned to his side of the pillow wall, removed his cufflinks with focused attention, set them precisely on his bedside table, and then sat down on the edge of the bed as if they had just agreed on something very reasonable. I want to tell you something, he said, without looking at her. She waited. I do not know you well yet, he said slowly. We have had 12 meetings across 4 months, and in those meetings I have learned that you prefer cold coffee to warm, that you disagree with approximately 40% of what I say but rarely argue unless you're certain, and that you look at old paintings the way most people look at people they love. He paused. I found this interesting. I still find it interesting. Lindsay felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. Just a thread, barely anything, but it loosened. I also want to tell you, he continued, his voice dropping slightly lower, that whatever you are not saying, and I can tell there is something, I am not asking you to say it tonight, or tomorrow, or any night you are not ready. She looked at him. He was still not looking at her, still focused on some middle distance that allowed her the privacy of his inattention. But I want you to know, he added quietly, that if anyone has ever hurt you, I will not overreact. I will respond strategically. The room went very quiet. Lindsay's breath caught somewhere between her ribs. Strategically, she repeated. Yes. He finally looked at her then, and his dark eyes were completely calm. There is a difference between rage and resolution. I prefer resolution. It lasts longer. She did not know how to answer that. She didn't think he needed her to. He turned down his side of the bed, arranged himself with the careful dignity of a man who took bedtime routines very seriously, and said, Good night, Lindsay Moses Silvestri, as though her full new name was something he had been practicing. She stood in the candlelight for another long moment, her trembling hands finally going still. And then she thought, with a kind of startled wonder she hadn't felt in years, this terrifying man is more nervous than I am. Somehow, that was more dangerous than anything else he could have been. Lindsay Moses had grown up in Atlanta, the youngest child of the Moses family. A family that had once been the kind of powerful that came with magazine features and charitable galas and a certain kind of golden expectation placed on every child's shoulders before they were old enough to understand the weight. Her father, Gerald Moses, had built a textile and fine arts import company over 40 years, and for a long time it had been something magnificent. Lindsay had grown up surrounded by beauty, old paintings, careful craftsmanship, rooms full of things with history embedded in them, and she had absorbed that love like sunlight, eventually pursuing art conservation, spending her days rescuing beautiful things that had been damaged by time. She was good at it. She was very, very good at understanding how to heal things that looked irreparable. The irony of that was not lost on her. By the time Lindsay was 23, the family company had begun to fracture. Poor investments, a brother who made decisions badly and loudly, and a series of debts that accumulated faster than anyone wanted to admit. Her father grew ill. Her mother, Diana Moses, spent those years quietly absorbing the blows and holding the family together with the kind of silent strength that never gets enough credit. And her older brother, Marcus Moses, had already been doing damage that no one in the family spoke about publicly. Marcus was charming in the way that certain people are charming, effortlessly, dangerously, in ways that made everyone around him feel special until the moment they didn't. He was 10 years older than Lindsay, and for most of her childhood she had admired him the way younger siblings often admire older ones. That particular brand of hero worship that blinds you to everything inconvenient. By the time she was old enough to see him clearly, the damage was already done. She wore the proof of it on her left side, where 3 years of Marcus's particular brand of anger had left marks that no amount of time had fully erased. She had left Atlanta at 26 with a conservation job in New York and a suitcase she'd packed in 40 minutes while Marcus was away at a conference. She had not told her mother everything. She never could, because Diana Moses had enough to carry and Lindsay had spent her entire life trying not to add to the weight. She had simply gone, built something quiet and contained and careful in New York, made friends slowly, trusted no one quickly, learned to exist in the margins of her own life, taking up exactly as much space as she needed and no more. And then came the offer. Her father's company had one remaining asset, a long-standing international partnership with the Silvestri family estate's arts program, a connection that had been maintained for 2 decades through careful relationship management and Gerald Moses's personal reputation. When Gerald died, the connection had frayed. And when the Silvestri family's attorneys reached out about a strategic partnership arrangement, a marriage that would formalize and stabilize the business alliance while providing Lindsay with financial protection and the Moses estate's remaining debts quietly absorbed, Diana Moses had called her with the kind of careful, pained voice that meant she had already said yes in her heart and was asking Lindsay's permission. Lindsay had taken 4 days. She had reviewed Barone Silvestri's background with the thoroughness of someone who had learned exactly what men were capable of. She had spoken with 3 women who knew him personally, his late cousin's wife, a business associate in Rome, a gallery curator in Florence, and all 3 had said variations of the same thing. He is not easy to know, but he is exactly what he appears to be. She had found no evidence of cruelty, no rumors of the kind that followed men like Marcus through rooms. And she had said yes, not for love, not even for hope. She had said yes because she was 29 years old, and she was tired of surviving when there might be an option to simply exist safely instead. What she had not planned for was Barone Silvestri being, in his own particular way, completely bewildering. The first morning after the wedding, Lindsay came downstairs at 7:30 to find the dining room's long table set for 2 with what appeared to be an extremely formal breakfast. Actual china, actual silver, tiny folded napkins, a centerpiece of fresh flowers that looked like someone had considered their placement for a meaningful amount of time. Barone was already seated, reading a newspaper with focused attention, dressed as though he had a board meeting scheduled for 8. She sat down. A woman appeared from the kitchen immediately with coffee, and Lindsay noticed the coffee was already cold, or rather room temperature, placed before her without any offer of warming it. She glanced at the attendant, a tall, elegant woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a very straight spine, who gave her a small nod that communicated, "Yes, I know about the cold coffee. We all know." "Good morning," Barone said from behind the newspaper. "Good morning," Lindsay said. He lowered the paper, looked at her with a brief assessing look, and then set it aside entirely as though he had just decided the paper could wait. "I have prepared a document," he said. She paused with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "A document. For your comfort," he said, and reached beside him to produce a single printed page, which he slid across the table toward her with the focused precision of someone presenting a contract. "I consulted several resources." She looked at the page. It was a printed spreadsheet, neatly formatted, titled at the top in clean font, "Emotional Comfort Options, Daily Framework." Beneath the title were 3 columns: option, description, and Barone's notes. The options listed included things like morning solitude period, 2 hours of uninterrupted personal time. Notes column read, non-negotiable for mental restoration. I have scheduled meetings during this window. Estate garden walk, 1 hour. Notes column, lavender is at peak bloom. I find it helps, though I recognize individual responses to lavender vary. Lunch with Azura. Notes column, Azura Benedetti is your personal attendant. She is trustworthy. She does not gossip. She makes excellent espresso. And at the bottom, in slightly smaller font, evening conversation with Barone, optional. Notes column, no obligation. I will be in the library. You may join or not join without explanation required. Lindsay read the entire document twice. "You made me a spreadsheet," she said. "For your comfort," he repeated, completely serious. "A comfort spreadsheet." "Yes." She looked at him across the china and the silver and the carefully considered flowers. He was watching her with the expression of someone who had put genuine effort into something and was waiting to find out if it had landed correctly. Against every instinct, she felt the corner of her mouth move. "Thank you," she said carefully. He nodded once. "You're welcome." And then he picked up his newspaper again, and she drank her cold coffee, and it was, strange as it was, the most peaceful breakfast she could remember having in years. Azzurra Benedetti was 43, Sicilian, and had been with the Silvestri estate for 16 years. She had the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to anticipate needs before they became requests, and the particular warmth of someone who had never confused efficiency with coldness. She appeared in Lindsay's life with quiet steadiness, bringing coffee at precisely the right temperature, knowing when to talk and when to simply exist in the same room without commentary. On the third day, Azzurra found Lindsay standing in the estate's gallery corridor, looking at a 17th-century Flemish painting that had been hung very slightly crooked, only a few millimeters off, the kind of thing most people never noticed. "It has been like that for 11 years, Azzurra said. "No one has ever said anything because no one has ever noticed." "It bothers me deeply," Lindsay said. "I will have it adjusted." "Thank you." Lindsay tilted her head slightly, studying the painting. "How long have you worked here?" 16 years. "And Barone?" Azzurra was quiet for a moment, in a way that meant she was choosing her words with care. "He is a good man," she said finally. "He is not always an easy man, but he is a good one. There is a difference." "I know," Lindsay said, and she meant it. Azzurra looked at her with a brief, quiet look. "He reorganized the kitchen schedule when he learned you prefer cold coffee," she said. "He told Chef Rietti that the coffee should be prepared 20 minutes early and left to rest. He framed it as a general update for the household." Lindsay absorbed this. "He also," Azzurra continued, her voice entirely neutral, "asked me to obtain 3 different books on art conservation last week. He has been reading them in the evenings." Lindsay turned to look at her. Azzurra's expression remained perfectly composed. "I simply thought you should know," she said, and moved away down the corridor, leaving Lindsay alone with the almost straight painting and the strange, warm thing happening quietly in her chest. Ricci was Barone's strategist, advisor, and the human equivalent of a warning system. He was 51, compact, permanently skeptical, and had been observing Barone Silvestri for 20 years with the focused attention of someone who had chosen this job and never once stopped paying for that choice. On the 4th day after the wedding, Ricci knocked on Barone's study door, entered without waiting for an answer the way he always did, and placed a folder on the desk. "You're distracted," Ricci said. "I'm working," Barone said without looking up. "You have read the same page of that report 4 times," Ricci said. "I counted." Barone set down the report. "She walked through the south garden this morning," Barone said. "I know," Ricci said. "I was there. She found the abandoned herb section near the east wall. The one that hasn't been tended in 3 years." Barone's jaw tightened slightly. "She spent 40 minutes there. She didn't say anything. She just stood there looking at it. And nothing. She just looked at it." He paused. "Like she recognized it." Ricci studied him for a long moment. "Boss," he said, using the informal address he reserved for moments of genuine concern. "This woman has been here 4 days. I'm aware of how calendars work, Ricci. I'm saying," Ricci continued carefully, "that whatever you are currently feeling, I would recommend feeling it more slowly." Barone looked at him with the calm, unreadable expression that had ended several business negotiations in his favor. "I'll take that under advisement." "She smiled at breakfast," Ricci added. Barone's focus sharpened. "Not at anything specific," Ricci said. "Just to herself. While she was reading. Apparently one of the books she brought from New York made her smile." Barone was quiet for a moment that lasted slightly longer than it needed to. Then he said, "Cancel my afternoon." "Which meetings?" "All of them." Ricci closed his eyes briefly. "This is happening faster than I expected," he said, mostly to himself, and left the study. 2 weeks became 3. 3 weeks became a month. And somewhere in that month, between the cold coffee and the spreadsheets and the late evenings in the library and the quiet walks through an estate that was slowly beginning to feel like something other than foreign, A shape began to form between Lindsay Moses Silvestri and Barone Silvestri that neither of them was entirely prepared for. It happened in increments, the way most real things do. It happened in the evenings when Lindsay started appearing in the library doorway. Not joining exactly, not committing, just standing there with a book of her own until Barone looked up and said, "There is better light by the window," and she moved to the chair by the window without acknowledging this as the invitation it was. It happened in the mornings when he started leaving things on the breakfast table for her. A magazine article about a Flemish restoration project in Belgium, printed and left beside her coffee with no note. A small book of Italian garden history that he had clearly been reading, a post-it on the page about lavender that read simply, "Interesting chapter. Thought you might find it relevant." It happened over the estate finances, which Lindsay had offered to help review because she had a good head for numbers and because looking at spreadsheets felt safer than looking at him directly. "This allocation is wrong," she said one evening, pointing to a column in the arts acquisition budget. Barone leaned forward to look at the screen. "It's how it's always been done." "That doesn't make it right," she said. He looked at her. "The conservation budget should be allocated quarterly, not annually," she said. "Condition issues don't wait for fiscal years. You're losing money every time a piece deteriorates past the point of standard treatment because you don't have funds available in the right cycle." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Restructure it however makes sense to you. You trust me on that? You know more about art conservation than I do," he said simply. "Why would I argue?" She looked at him. "Most people argue even when they know less. Most people are trying to win something," he said. "I'm trying to get the right answer." He paused. "They're not always the same thing." Lindsay looked back at the budget screen, but she was thinking about what he had just said, and how few people she had ever met in her life who genuinely understood the difference. "Barone," she said. "Yes. Why did you agree to this arrangement?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "There were business reasons. The alliance mattered. My attorneys were persuasive about the structural benefits." Another pause. "But also the report on you was thorough. And there was something in it I found compelling." "What?" "It said you had rebuilt your career twice," he said. "Once when you left Atlanta. Once when you left a position in New York under circumstances the report described as professionally hostile." He looked at her. "You left each time instead of shrinking. That is not a small thing." She felt the words land somewhere she hadn't expected. "Most people shrink," he said. "You moved. Those are different survival strategies, and one of them is considerably harder." She said nothing for a long moment. "You read reports about me," she finally said. "Of course. You also read reports about me." He tilted his head slightly. 12 meetings. You knew what you were evaluating. Were you satisfied with your evaluation?" "I'm still gathering data," she said. And Barone Silvestri, feared head of the Silvestri family, actually smiled briefly, genuinely, as though it had surprised him too, before looking back at the budget screen. The evenings in the library became a quiet routine. They read near each other. They argued about things, art versus architecture, the ethics of private art ownership versus public access, whether espresso taken after 9 p.m. indicated either genuine passion or poor judgment. Barone held opinions with the stubborn precision of someone who had formed them carefully, which meant Lindsay could argue with him without feeling like she was arguing into nothing. He pushed back. He changed his mind sometimes. He admitted when she made a better point, plainly and without drama, which she found so unexpectedly disarming she had to look away from him more than once. She was beginning to understand that the terrifying thing about Barone Silvestri was not his power or his stillness or even his strategic mind. The terrifying thing was that he was genuinely, completely paying attention to her. Not to what she represented or what she could offer or what she looked like from across a room. To her. Her actual arguments. Her actual preferences. Her actual, unguarded moments when she forgot to maintain careful distance. He never pressed her. Never pulled at the thread of what she didn't say. But she could feel him noticing. The way some conversations made her go quiet. The way she sat with her left side slightly turned. The way she sometimes stopped herself mid-gesture as though she had remembered a rule about how much space she was allowed to take up. He was noticing. And he said nothing. which was somehow more intimate than any question he could have asked. She had begun to trust him in the way that felt most dangerous. Not the kind of trust that comes from agreements and documents, but the kind that comes from 10,000 small moments of someone simply behaving consistently. The kind of trust that sneaks up on you because it doesn't announce itself. The kind that means when you realize it's there, it's already too late to guard against it. One morning at breakfast, Barone told her, with complete seriousness, that he had let the previous chef go for making a soup that had caused her to sigh. "I didn't sigh," she said. "You sighed," he said. "A very specific sigh. I have catalogued it. It is different from your thoughtful sigh, your tired sigh, and your "I disagree but I'm choosing not to argue" sigh." She stared at him. "You have catalogued my sighs. There are 4 distinct categories," he said. The soup sigh was new. "I didn't like it." "Barone, you cannot let a chef go because of a sigh." "I gave additional reasons in the termination letter," he said. "But the sigh was the primary motivation. That is honestly one of the most dramatic things I have ever heard." "He has been placed with an excellent household in Milan and received a generous severance," Barone said, completely unruffled. "It was dramatic and responsible." She pressed her lips together to hold back a laugh and failed. It escaped. A real one, full and genuine, surprising her with its own sound. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that. It felt like something pulled up from somewhere she'd sealed off, and for a moment the surprise of it was almost overwhelming. Barone looked at her across the table with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary and was trying very hard not to let that show on his face. He picked up his newspaper with slightly more focus than was necessary. "She laughed," Ricci said later that afternoon, appearing in Barone's study doorway. "She laughed," Barone confirmed. He was staring at a financial report he had not read a single line of. Ricci stood there for a moment. "Cancel the Prague meeting," Barone said. "It's already been rescheduled twice. Reschedule it again." Ricci closed his eyes. "You understand," he said, "that you are the most powerful and strategically efficient person I have ever worked for, and that you are currently behaving like a man who cannot function." "Yes," Barone said, perfectly calm. "I'm aware." Ricci left, muttering something in Italian that Barone chose not to acknowledge. It was a Thursday evening in early spring when the storm came in. It built through the afternoon, the sky going the particular shade of bruised purple that meant serious weather, the wind picking up through the lavender gardens and bending everything sideways, the kind of storm that announces itself well in advance and arrives anyway harder than you expected. The estate staff secured the outdoor furniture and closed the heavy shutters on the east wing. Azura brought extra candles to the library. Barone worked through the late afternoon with the windows rattling softly behind him, occasionally glancing up. Lindsay had been in the gallery corridor. When the lights went out, she was alone. The power cut completely, not a flicker, a full, immediate black. The gallery was interior, no windows, and the darkness was total. And the thunder that followed the power cut was the kind that doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives in the walls, in the floor, in the chest. She stopped breathing. Not chose to stop. Simply stopped, the way the body sometimes overrides the rational mind and goes somewhere older and more instinctive. Somewhere that knows that dark and sudden noise are not separate things. That they come together, that what follows them is Lindsay. Barone's voice came from somewhere in the dark, low and calm, not close enough to startle, not far enough to be useless. "I'm here," he said. She exhaled in a ragged push. "I'm going to come toward you," he said. "I'll keep talking so you know exactly where I am." "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was wrong. She could hear it. "Of course," he said. "I'm coming anyway. You can hear the echo. I'm about 4 meters to your left." She could hear him moving. Slowly, deliberately, narrating the distance. 3 meters. 2. He stopped. She could feel the slight warmth of him nearby, close enough that she wasn't alone, far enough that she was still in her own space. He did not touch her. He simply stopped there, in the dark, and waited. The thunder came again. She flinched, involuntary, sharp, and he did not reach out, did not grab her arm or pull her toward him. He just stayed exactly where he was. Tell me something, she said, because she needed a voice. Any voice. His voice. The estate was built in 1687, he said immediately, his tone settling into something conversational and unhurried. The original structure was smaller, about a third of what it is now. The gallery corridor we're in was added in 1821 by my great-great-great-grandfather, who was, by all family accounts, an extraordinarily vain man who wanted a longer space to hang portraits of himself. She exhaled a sound that was almost a laugh. How many portraits? 14, Barone said. They are all in storage. My grandmother found them self-congratulatory. Your grandmother sounds sensible. She was formidable. She would have liked you. Pause. She also would have told me within the first 5 minutes of meeting me that I was emotionally compromised and should simply say so. Something in the darkness shifted. Are you? Lindsay asked quietly. The storm pressed against the shutters. Yes, he said. Considerably. She was quiet for a long time. He waited in the dark without moving, without pushing, with that particular patient stillness that had stopped feeling dangerous weeks ago and started feeling like the most solid thing she had ever stood near. I need to tell you something, she said. You don't have to. I know, she said. I want to. She told him in the dark. Not everything. Not the full years of it. Not the way Marcus Moses had moved through their family home with a particular brand of controlled anger that nobody outside those walls ever believed was real. She didn't have the words for all of that in one dark corridor in the middle of a thunderstorm. But she told him what existed on her body. She told him that she'd been hiding it. She told him why. And then, because the dark made it somehow possible, she took his hand, reaching for it without thinking, and guided it to the side of her gown where the silk shifted over the irregular texture beneath. He didn't move, didn't speak. His hand stayed exactly where she'd placed it, absolutely still, and she could feel him simply acknowledging what was there without recoiling, without commentary, without the particular horror-tinged pity she'd always dreaded more than anything else. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, who knew and did nothing? Not, who did this to you? Not, I'll destroy him. Not an explosion of rage or a declaration of violence. Just those 5 quiet words, with the particular focused energy of a man who was not asking in grief, but in the specific calm of someone already beginning to think. My mother didn't know the full extent, she said. I don't mean your mother, he said, who had power to act, and chose not to. She thought of the family friends who'd seen enough to question, and hadn't. The doctors who'd treated her and filled in the paperwork the way paperwork was always filled in. The social circles Marcus moved through, where his charm had been its own kind of protection. The people who'd known enough to ask and had simply not asked. She named 3 people. He was quiet. All right, he said. That was all. Just, all right. The lights came back on gradually, emergency generators first, main power following. The gallery corridor filled with soft, warm light, and Lindsay found herself standing in the restored visibility feeling completely exposed and, underneath that exposure, something she didn't immediately have a word for. Barone was looking at her. Just looking, with those dark, steady eyes, with nothing in his expression that looked like regret or reassessment or any of the things she'd spent years fearing. Come, he said quietly. There's a fire in the library. You should be warm. She followed him down the corridor, and she noticed his hand stayed close to her elbow. Not touching, just close. The whole way. She did not see the resolution happen. She was not supposed to. Within 72 hours of that night in the gallery corridor, Barone had 3 conversations. She knew this because Ricci let it slip accidentally to Azura, who had the particular discretion of someone who understood exactly which things Lindsay should know and which things she would be better off understanding without witnessing. Marcus Moses's current business contacts in New York, 2 property development firms and a private equity group that had been significantly extending him social and financial credibility, received calls from lawyers representing interests they could not afford to ignore. The calls were politely framed as conflict disclosures. The result was that 3 pending projects Marcus had positioned himself centrally within quietly restructured their boards, and his name disappeared from the relevant documents. The family lawyer who had, over the years, filed certain reports in ways that protected Marcus rather than the family's interests, received a registered letter containing information he had not known was available. The letter requested only a meeting. Marcus's own attorney, upon learning the letter existed, advised him strongly to settle all outstanding personal matters quickly and quietly. The social director of the Atlanta Charitable Foundation, Marcus, sat on the board of a board that provided him with exactly the kind of untouchable civic reputation that made people disinclined to believe difficult things about him, received an anonymous tip. A thorough, documented, factual tip. The kind that foundations take very seriously and handle very quietly, because foundations understand that their credibility is their only real asset. Marcus Moses lost his board position by the following Thursday. Within 2 weeks, 3 of the 5 social circles he'd cultivated with particular care had quietly collapsed around him. Not publicly, not loudly, not with any confrontation he could respond to or fight against. Simply gone. Like fog burning off in morning light. No scandal. No spectacle. No revenge story he could make himself the wronged protagonist of. Just erasure. Strategic, surgical, complete. When Azura finally told Lindsay, carefully, factually, without editorializing, Lindsay sat with the information for a long time. She was in the herb garden by the east wall, the one she'd been quietly restoring over the past several weeks. Her hands were in the soil. The April sun was on the back of her neck. "He didn't ask me first," she said finally. "No," Azura said. "He should have asked me." "Yes," Azura agreed. Lindsay was quiet for another moment. "Is he in the library?" "Study." She washed her hands at the outdoor basin and walked to the main house. Barone was at his desk when she opened the door without knocking, which she had never done before, and he looked up with the contained surprise of someone who has trained their expressions carefully and is still not entirely in control of them. She stood in the doorway. "You should have asked me," she said. "Yes," he said immediately. "I should have. I'm sorry." She looked at him. "You're actually apologizing." "You are correct that I should have consulted you," he said. "What happened to you is yours. The response to it should also be yours to direct. I overrode that because He paused. Reformulated. I was not in a strategic frame of mind. I was in a different frame of mind. What frame of mind? He met her eyes. The frame of mind of someone who could not sit with that information and do nothing. She was quiet. "I should still have asked," he said. "Both things are true. I acted and I should have asked. And I understand if that matters to you in a way that takes precedence over the outcome." She walked further into the study, sat down across from him, not in the formal chair at the edge of the room, but the closer one, the one Ricci used when delivering difficult news. She set her hands flat on her knees and looked at him steadily. "He's not going to be able to hurt anyone else the way he hurt me," she said. "No," Barone said. "He won't." "You're certain?" "I'm always certain of what I've done," he said. "That is not arrogance. That is just how I work." She believed him. She looked at him across the desk, in the afternoon light, and she simply believed him. Not because of the outcome or the power or the strategic efficiency of what he had done, but because she had watched him for 2 months be exactly what he appeared to be, without variation, without inconsistency, without the particular gap between public self and private self that she had learned to watch for the way other people watched for weather. "Barone," she said. "Yes. Thank you." He held her gaze. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." Something shifted in his expression just slightly, and he looked down at the desk surface for a moment, the way people do when they've been handed something they're not sure how to hold without dropping it. "You're welcome," he said quietly. Spring arrived in the lavender gardens in the particular, overwhelming way spring arrives in places that have been waiting for it. The East Herb Garden, which Lindsay had spent 7 weeks carefully reclaiming from 3 years of neglect, began to show green at the base of the rosemary stalks, fragile and determined. She had been out there most mornings before breakfast, her hands in the soil, Azura bringing coffee at exactly the right time, the estate waking up around her in the golden early light. Barone started appearing. Not immediately, but gradually. He would come out with his own coffee and sit on the low stone wall at the garden's edge, Far enough not to be in the way, close enough to be present. He brought his reading sometimes. Occasionally they talked. Mostly they existed in the same quiet space in the way that takes a particular kind of comfort to sustain, the kind that doesn't need words to justify itself. There were things that happened in those weeks that Lindsay would think about later. Small things, unglamorous things, the ordinary texture of two people learning to occupy the same life without erasure. There was the morning she woke before dawn and could not sleep and went to the kitchen and found him already there, standing at the counter with 2 cups of coffee. The lights low, the estate completely silent around them. He did not ask what had woken her. He handed her the cold cup. Hers was already cooling, and they stood together in the kitchen in the dark, not talking, and it was the most natural thing she had ever experienced in another person's home. There was the afternoon she came back from a phone call with her mother and sat down in the chair by the library window and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, sustained kind of crying that comes from a long conversation where too much was said and not enough was fixed. Barone came in 20 minutes later, set a cup of tea on the table beside her without comment, then sat down across from her and opened a book and read in her presence for the next hour, simply being there, not trying to resolve anything, just existing in the room with her so she was not alone in it. Afterward, she told him a little more about Lindsay Moses, who had loved her children with everything she had and had also been, in her own particular way, unable to look directly at the things she most needed to see. Not cruelty. The particular blindness of someone who needed her world to be navigable and had made peace with that navigation by not examining certain doors too closely. Barone listened to all of it. He asked one question, "Does she know now?" "Enough," Lindsay said. "Not everything, but enough that she's stopped asking me to forgive him." He nodded. "That seems like what matters most." "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what matters most." One Saturday morning in late April, he came out to the garden and sat on the wall and watched her working for a long time before he said anything. "I need to tell you something," he said. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was looking at the garden, not at her, with the focused attention of a man who was working up to something and had decided the only way out was through. "I have reorganized my schedule 3 times in the past 6 weeks around yours," he said. "Not strategically. I reorganized it because I wanted to be in whatever room you were in." He paused. "I have also found it impossible to focus on a significant proportion of my professional responsibilities because I am, frequently, thinking about what you said last or what you're going to say next or what made you go quiet in that particular way, or what you look like when you're looking at something you find beautiful, which is frequently how you look at this herb garden, and also occasionally how you look at me, and I am aware that second observation may be wishful thinking, but I am including it in the interest of comprehensive honesty." Lindsay did not move. "I have memorized the way you breathe when you're about to argue," he said, "and the way it's different when you've already decided I'm wrong but you're going to let it go, and the way it changes when you're in a room you feel safe in versus one you don't." He stopped, started again. "Irrational," he said. "I have been entirely irrational for approximately 6 weeks, and I am a person who does not do irrational. Ricci has noted this multiple times." A bird moved through the lavender beyond the garden wall. "I believe," Barone said, with the particular controlled difficulty of a man delivering difficult news about himself, "that I am emotionally compromised by you." The garden was very quiet. "Considerably," he added. Lindsay looked at him. He finally looked back with those dark, steady eyes that she had been learning to read for 2 months, that were, she realized, much more readable than he intended, for anyone paying close enough attention. There was no calculation in them right now, no management, just him and whatever this was, and the particular vulnerability of someone who had led with honesty and had no idea what happened next. "I have spent my entire life," Lindsay said slowly, "learning to be very small, to take up very little space, to not need things loudly, because needing things loudly got me things I didn't want." She paused. "I got very good at being careful, at managing distance, at making sure nobody got close enough to find out." He waited. "I didn't think this was going to be real," she said. "I said yes to this because it was safe, not because I expected it to mean anything." She looked at her soil-dark hands. "But you kept being you, just consistently, genuinely, completely you, and I didn't have a defense for that." He was very still. "I waited my whole life," she said, "to feel safe enough to let someone in. I didn't know what that was going to feel like when it happened." She looked up at him. "It feels like this. It feels like you." Barone stood up from the wall and walked to where she was kneeling in the garden, and he held out his hand. Palm up, open, an offer and not a demand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it, and he pulled her to her feet gently, and they stood in the April morning light, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. She was not afraid. Not of this. Not of him. Not of whatever came next. He raised his free hand and rested it against the side of her face with the careful attention of someone who understood that this was a choice she was making and a trust she was extending, and he treated it accordingly. "I am not going to be perfect at this," he said quietly. "I will almost certainly send you more spreadsheets." "I know," she said, "and I will probably ask Ricci to fact-check my emotional responses, which he will find extremely annoying." "I know," she said again, and she was smiling. "But I want you to know," he said, "that I am paying attention. I have been paying attention since the day you sat down across from me in that first meeting and told me that 3 of my estate's paintings were hung at incorrect heights and you could tell from the ambient light damage on the frames, and you said it like it was simply a fact and not a criticism because to you it simply was a fact." He paused. "I thought about that for 3 days." She laughed. "You thought about my opinion on frame heights for 3 days." "I thought about you," he said. "The frame heights were incidental." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, slowly, carefully, with the same deliberate patience he brought to everything, and held her there in the morning light while the lavender swayed in the spring air beyond the wall. No rush, no demand, no anything except 2 people choosing each other, plainly and clearly, in daylight with full knowledge of who they both were. The program did not have a name at first. It began as a series of conversations between Lindsay and Azura, between Lindsay and a lawyer Barone trusted, between Lindsay and a women's advocacy director in Rome. Lindsay drove the framework. Barone provided the funding structure, the legal infrastructure, the quiet network of contacts that made things happen without spectacle. He sat in exactly 2 of the initial meetings, said almost nothing in both of them, and told Lindsay afterward that she was significantly better at this than he was and his role should be financial and logistical support only. "You're not going to try to run it," she said. "It is not mine to run," he said. "It's yours." The program provided housing, legal support, and financial independence pathways for women leaving abusive situations, particularly women caught in the specific trap of economic dependence that made leaving feel impossible. It started with 6 women in the first 3 months. By the end of the year, 43. Lindsay worked from the estate's east wing, which had been converted with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting for a purpose and recognized it when it arrived. She worked long days with a fullness she had never associated with work before, the kind that comes from a task you understand from the inside, from personal knowledge, from survival translated into service. Barone learned to ask good questions. He learned to sit with hard answers. He learned to listen in the way she needed people to listen. Not problem-solving, not fixing, just receiving. He was not, as he had predicted, perfect at it. He sent her exactly 4 more spreadsheets over the following months, each one earnestly intended, each one slightly more useful than the last. He argued with her about operational decisions and changed his mind when she was right and made her defend her position when she wasn't. And she found she trusted the arguments because he had proven he could lose them gracefully. The herb garden was fully restored by June. Rosemary, thyme, sage, lemon verbena, and 3 varieties of lavender that Azura had sourced from a farm in Provence. Because Lindsay had mentioned once that she liked the particular gray-purple of Provençal lavender, and the way it smelled earthier than the Italian variety. Barone had commissioned the sourcing without telling her, and the first morning she walked out to find growth she didn't recognize. She turned to find him standing at the garden wall with the very contained expression of someone trying not to look proud of themselves. "Provençal," she said. "Yes," he said. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say," he said. "I have mentioned this." She walked over and took his hand, and he looked at their joined hands with the expression of a man who found this still slightly miraculous and had not quite gotten used to it, and probably never entirely would. One afternoon, Lindsay led him into the gallery corridor, to the 17th century Flemish painting that had been hung slightly crooked for 11 years. It was perfectly straight now, had been for months, adjusted the same week Azura had mentioned it. My grandmother loved this painting, Barone said. I know, Lindsay said. Azura told me. She also told me your grandmother was the one who originally hung it. He looked at the painting. She hung it slightly crooked on purpose, Lindsay said. It's documented in the estate inventory. She wrote a note beside the entry. She said that anything hung perfectly straight looked like it was waiting for something, and she preferred things to look like they had already arrived. He was quiet for a long moment. I straightened it before I knew that, Lindsay said. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. He tilted his head, looking at the painting in its corrected position. She would have laughed. She would have said that maybe arriving was the point after all. Lindsay looked at the painting too. A Flemish landscape, fields and light, and a small figure in the distance who might have been walking toward something or away from something, impossible to tell from this angle. I think she would have been right, Barone said quietly. Lindsay squeezed his hand. The scars on her left side were exactly what they were. Marks of what had been survived, evidence of endurance, permanent and real, and no longer hidden under layers of careful positioning. She no longer angled away from mirrors. She no longer calculated the geometry of rooms to keep certain parts of herself invisible. She stood in doorways straight, took up her full amount of space, argued at full volume when she had something to argue, and laughed without cataloging what the laugh might give away. She was not healed in some complete, final way. Healing was not a destination. She had come to understand. It was a practice, something you did every day, some days better than others, some days from the beginning again. But she was no longer alone in it. And that difference was so enormous it barely had a name. What she was clearly, fully, permanently was safe. Not because of Barone's power. Not because of the strategic resolution he had applied to Marcus Moses. Not because of wealth or estate or the quiet machinery of the Silvestri family. Safe because she had chosen, one careful step at a time, to trust something fragile and real. Safe because trust, extended toward someone who deserved it, was its own kind of protection, not armor exactly, but something better. A foundation. The kind of thing you build on, not just behind. And the foundation held. If the story reached something in you, if you stayed until the very end because you needed to see how it landed, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to believe that safe is possible. Every like tells the algorithm this story is worth finding, and it is. Stories about survival and trust and choosing something real always are. Thanks for watching. See you in the next.